CT Special Forces 2, Back in the Trenches, came out in 2004 for the Game Boy Advance in North America. Of note, it came out in 2003 in Europe under the subtitle Back to Hell. I don't know if either title makes any sense, as this isn't Europe circa World War II, and the cutesy art design doesn't really speak to the hell of war. Saving Private Ryan? This is not. Anyway, the sequel continues to follow the Metal Slug style game design that was established in the previous entry, but this time with more animations, more gameplay varieties, and more level passwords. For fans of the original, do these additions make it worth picking up now? And if you haven't played the original, should you start with the second outing first? Let's discuss. The gameplay of CT2 is very similar to CT1, and much like that initial entry, you're rocking and rolling with various gameplay modes in addition to your primary run and gun style. The controls still feel responsive, you can still shoot in all directions, and everything is handled in a relatively stress-free manner. Gameplay similarities aside, CT2 improves on its predecessor's run and gun gameplay in a few key ways. The most immediately noticeable change was the addition of direction changes while crouching. This was an annoyance in the first CT, and it's nice to see our operator finally had insurance come through on that long overdue hip and knee replacement. Another positive addition is the newfound ability of our operator to conduct a melee knife attack when enemies are close. In the first game, you and an enemy could essentially occupy the same space while shooting and neither would get hit. In CT2, your character automatically switches from gun to knife to take out an overlapping opponent. The action happens reliably too, which was nice to see. Another addition to the game is the ability to drop and roll forward. This helps to close the gap between yourself and enemies while staying low. It's also required to get under some low bridges and machines that want to terminate you. That said, the rollability also ends up being a frustrating aspect at times, as you'll duck for cover from bullets. But when you try to get up and go forward, if you do it too quickly after crouching, you may activate the roll unintentionally, and you'll go right off a cliff or into some danger. CT1 stood out from the pack by tossing in a variety of gameplay styles in addition to the run and gun. The developers must have felt this was the game's special sauce, as CT2 tells CT1 to hold my beer by adding even more gameplay styles. Before covering the additional modes though, let's discuss the changes to the modes that were in the first game too. The helicopter missions are back and have more enemies on screen and more going on in general. A key aspect is the enemy's acquisition of a targeting system to their weaponry, which tracks and tries to get a lock on you. This forces you to move around the screen more to avoid the reticle. This amps up the heat of battle as you can't sit toward the back of the screen, which means you have reduced time to react to incoming fire. Additionally, in this mode, you now have the ability to pick up weapon power-ups, not just health. The weapon power-up upgrades your main gun, which saves time when trying to clear the screen. Parachuting missions are also back, and before you moan and groan too much, they are much more forgiving this time around, with a bigger sweet spot for shoot release, plus a prompt to activate your shoot. The parachuting insta-deaths were a highly frustrating part of the first game, and the changes made this time around make these sequences feel much more fair and far less cheap. Sniper missions also make a return. This time, there's a guiding arrow that brings you directly to your next target. No more blind panic searches. This does shave some of the raw intensity from the first game off though. To prevent the sniper sections from becoming too easy, the health boost you used to receive in the first game from taking out a hostage taker has been removed. This is definitely a case of give and take, but the loss of intensity was actually something I didn't think I would miss, but I do. Perhaps just a case of too much hand-holding. Since this is a sequel, the developer saw fit to throw some new stuff in to further expand the game. For any of you Choplifter fans out there, this one is definitely for you. You man an unarmed helicopter and have to rescue civilians on the ground while dodging a variety of enemies. You then have to drop civilians back at your base before going back to pick up more people. Apparently, the developers were able to squeeze in this near-carbon copy of Choplifter, as the rights for Choplifter were nebulous, and this essentially was what equates to a minigame. These sections offer a bit of challenge, but are also straightforward. Definitely a solid homage. You get to operate a tank this time around. You control the movement of the tank and can fire both its machine gun and shells. You can take a solid amount of fire during these sections too, which makes you feel pretty badass. Both weapons are extremely powerful, taking down enemies in enemy positions with ease. Aiming the guns while driving is a bit of a challenge though. Also, these sections tend to be rather short, so if you're really enjoying them, just be prepared for the joy to be short-lived. Another set of sections added to the missions have you riding in the back of a truck firing at other vehicles. These sections are probably the weakest of the additional gameplay modes though, as essentially it's still run and gun, but just on a much smaller platform. It becomes pretty apparent from the shifting gameplay styles and the globe-trotting missions that the game designers are doing their best to help replicate that action or spy thriller movie sentiment. The game relatively succeeds at making you feel the part, but some of the missions are rather short and feel shoehorned in a bit. Enemy AI is still fairly unintelligent in CT2. You still want to give someone the old hot foot? You got it. Good henchmen are so hard to come by. Your enemies have learned a couple new tricks though, so it isn't quite the same cakewalk. For example, you may have picked up a knife attack for melee, but your enemies have learned how to kick, so make sure you're knifing them quickly and always protecting the McNuggets. Some, but not all enemies, have learned to fire at multiple angles or fire a scatter shot, which forces you to be a little more alert and takes away from your ability to evade all attacks with minimal effort. A run and gun ain't quite right if the bosses aren't worthy, and CT2's bosses are one of its strong suits. From using vehicles, attacking by helicopter, or making you play the part of a toy trying to ruin a child's day by escaping a claw-grabbing device, boss variety is on point. Your weapons for dispatching bad guy after bad guy have expanded for the sequel too. You have your unlimited ammunition pistol as your primary weapon once again. You could pick up an automatic rifle, rocket launcher, grenade launcher, flamethrower, and grenades. The ammunition for these weapons is limited, but additional ammunition isn't a struggle to come by. The flamethrower sees a massive bump in usefulness this go around. Compared to the first game, your flames shoot further and the weapon can be fired in all directions. The flamethrower was a dud in the first game, so it's nice to see these changes. Overall, the weapon selection is a big plus. Of note though, you can roam through each level and pick up a terrific loadout for your arsenal, but when you beat the stage or level and then start the next one, that's all gone. This curbed my desire to explore levels and made me just want to focus on following a more direct path to the end of the level. CT2 also added actual in-game objectives. This was a sore point from the first game, which mentioned plot points in the cutscenes, but every level was essentially wipe out everybody on your way to the end. This time around, you need to rescue hostages, defuse bombs, place bombs, and collect plutonium, in addition to taking out some of those network scum. The objectives aren't anything groundbreaking by today's standards, and the game is still primarily focused on traditional run and gun, but at least there's something else on which you can focus. With regard to art design, the series continues the Metal Slug tradition of applying a cute and colorful scheme to a war-type setting. The artistic design of each level is unique, and each level is broken down into separate stages. The stages this time around also feel more unique. During the first few levels though, the game did have me concerned. You start out in the city, then head to the snowy mountains, then to the desert, and eventually end up in the jungle. Despite some different styling details, these levels are very similar to those of the first game. I began to wonder if the developers just changed the order of the levels up and called it a day. Although there is still a case for that argument, there were new levels added, such as the train and a dock, so it wasn't a complete carbon copy. There is plenty to look at in each level, such as graffiti on the subway, crumbling stones in the jungle, and various other details. This all helps the game world feel developed and keeps visual interest high. Another bump for the sequel is the addition of different weapon sprites. The first game had various weapons you could use, but the weapon sprite was the same whether you were firing a rifle or a rocket launcher. Animations in the game are solid, with the main character and enemies both animated well. Little touches like the knife flipping or hair fixing when you stand around helps to add that little something special to the game. Even the Choplifter sections show playfulness with the animations. When you rescue characters and drop them off, each character thanks the pilot in their own special way. Much like the first game, I am gonna knock the game for not inserting a burning enemy animation. I realize it's Nintendo in the early 2000s, but this wasn't the SNES Mortal Kombat era. We're shooting people and having the main character say he hopes he can take an enemy dead instead of alive. You're telling me it's too much to have a cartoonish burning enemy animation? Come on. The music and sound effects for CT2 are another very solid effort. The music is enjoyable through most of the game. I don't know if it stands out quite as much as the first game's music, but it's definitely solid. The sound effects are once again strong too, with each gun sounding unique, explosions sounding explosive, and bad guys grunting when shot or dying. For story, the network is up and running again. despite taking down numerous bosses from the first game. The story mimics similar spy and/or action movies, with the terroristic network needing to be stopped from doing very bad things. The story is told through cutscenes with text exchanges that occur between levels and stages. The story also sets up your in-game objectives, so you feel like there's an actual connection between what's being told to you on screen and what you need to accomplish, which is an improvement. The CT Special Forces 2 and its more mentality have that short game energy and quality of life features to fit into your busy life? Let's find out. The game's difficulty would be considered moderate. Most sections aren't too challenging as long as you are somewhat cognizant of your actions and aren't blindly sprinting into trouble. The sections outside of a traditional run and gun have become both easier, parachuting, and more challenging, later sniper level. These levels still guide you to your target, but the time to shoot is drastically much tighter. And if you miss even one shot or take too long to aim, you will fail. Additionally, there are some boss fights that may grind your gears a bit. Some are definitely designed for you to die a few times before you learn the necessary patterns to defeat the boss, which can be frustrating. The end boss in particular was rather challenging, and the battle is somewhat lengthy, so brace yourself for that one. With regard to game saves, there aren't any in this game, and there are no continuation points. But there are level and stage passwords. The first game only had level passwords, which created some frustration when dying at the end of a level and having to repeat all of the stages. This time around, there's none of that end of the level anxiety, which makes the experience much more forgiving and easier to pick up and play for a shorter session. With the generally balanced but occasionally frustrating difficulty and the generous level and stage passwords, CT2 receives a frustration minimal game frustration rating. There are no quality of life hacks, otherwise known as cheat codes, for CT2. Considering the game's difficulty, they're not really necessary. Of note, level and stage passwords vary based on how you completed the level or stage. The different level or stage passwords result in you starting the next level or stage with a different amount of lives. CT2 has a solid amount of replayability. There aren't a ton of different pathways or story parts for you to explore, but the various gameplay types will keep things interesting on another playthrough. Regarding game length, CT2 will probably take most people 3 to 5 hours to complete, which includes time spent dying and learning boss enemy patterns. For you physical collectors out there, CT2 will run you on average a bit over $30 for a loose copy, and over $50 for a complete edition. Of note, this is somewhat of a rare title, so don't be surprised if you need to search for competitive pricing. Overall, CT Special Forces 2, Back in the Trenches, is a very solid sequel. Its strength lies in the quality of improvements that affect gameplay and make it a less stressful experience to pick up and play from where you left off. There aren't any drastic changes, so if you're not a fan of the first, this won't change your mind. If you haven't played either game for a while, or even ever, and you are pressed for time with a busy life, I actually would recommend picking up CT2 first. SGE, highly recommended.